A massive Boeing 747 hurtles down a fog-covered runway, crossing the exact speed where aborting takeoff becomes impossible. But right at that moment of no return, a shadow emerges in the mist directly ahead. It is a second Boeing 747 sitting sideways on the exact same runway. In the ensuing collision, 583 people lost their lives in a matter of seconds. It remains the deadliest crash in aviation history, and neither plane had even left the ground. Commercial aviation relies on layers of redundant safety systems, like visual confirmation, active ground radar, and clear radio communication. In Tenerife, a sequence of separate, compounding events converged to strip away every one of those protections simultaneously. The sequence of events began a day earlier on March 26, 1977, when a separatist group detonated a small bomb inside the passenger terminal at Las Palmas Airport. In the Canary Islands, authorities immediately closed Las Palmas and forced incoming flights to divert. Among them were two massive Boeing 747 jumbo jets, Pan Am Flight 736, arriving from Los Angeles, and KLM Flight 4805 from Amsterdam. They were sent 110 km away to Los Rodeos Airport on the island of Tenerife. This was a tiny regional facility, entirely unequipped to handle a sudden influx of international commercial jetliners. Looking at the layout of Tenerife, you can see it only has a single runway and one main taxiway because the main parking apron quickly filled up. Incoming planes were ordered to park directly on the taxiway, completely blocking the primary navigation route. This sudden diversion created a severe bottleneck, instantly stripping away the airport's standard safety margins and trapping massive aircraft in a space never designed to hold them. Tenerife's geography compounds the problem. The airport sits at an elevation of 2,000 feet, right next to the ocean. Moist Atlantic air hits the mountainsides and pushes upward, rapidly condensing into dense, blinding clouds at ground level. During the delay, the KLM captain decided to fully refuel his aircraft. This logistical choice physically blocked the Pan Am flight, parked right behind them from leaving the tarmac. When Las Palmas finally reopened, the taxiway was still choked with parked planes. To get into position for takeoff, both fully loaded 7407s were forced to taxi directly down the active runway. Just as that dense mountain fog rolled in and slashed visibility, air traffic control instructed the Pan Am crew to leave the runway by taking the C3 exit. However, with visibility dropping to roughly 300 meters and several runway signs missing, the Pan Am pilots missed the C3 turn entirely and kept rolling straight into the mist. The Pan Am flight was now unwittingly stuck on the active runway, completely invisible to the control tower, and the KLM plane that was preparing to accelerate toward them from the opposite end, inside the control tower. Operators couldn't physically see either aircraft through the thick fog. To make matters worse, this small, regional airport was not equipped with a ground radar system. At the end of the runway, the KLM captain made a fatal assumption, believing he already had his clearance. He keyed his microphone, stated, "We are at takeoff," and pushed the thrust levers forward without waiting for explicit provision. The tower immediately commanded standby for takeoff, but simultaneously Pan Am transmitted, "We are still down the runway," using the same frequency. These simultaneous transmissions triggered a radio heterodyne. The signals canceled out, delivering only static distortion into the KLM cockpit. Hearing a fragment of the static, the KLM flight engineer asked his captain if the Pan Am plane was clear of the runway, but the captain focused entirely on the takeoff run, simply answered, "Oh, yes," and kept accelerating. The control tower was blind. The pilots were completely invisible, and radio warnings were silenced. With every single safety net removed, these two massive aircraft were now locked on an inescapable collision course out of the dense fog. The KLM aircraft was terrorized right in front of the Pan Am crew. The KLM plane attempted to lift off, but its right engine tore through the Pan Am's first-class section. The landing gear sheared off, and the fully fueled aircraft slammed back onto the runway, erupting into a massive fireball. 583 people died on the tarmac. Only 61 passengers from the Pan Am flight managed to escape by jumping through a hole in the fuselage. Because of the fog, air traffic controllers remained entirely oblivious to the disaster, until another aircraft reported seeing flames minutes later. The official investigation ultimately concluded that the primary cause was the KLM crew's tragic decision to take off without clearance. However, investigators also recognized that the disaster was the result of a highly complex chain of logistical and environmental events. Tenerife triggered sweeping, permanent changes across the aviation industry. Regulators mandated standard, unambiguous radio phrasing, completely eliminating vague statements like "at takeoff." They also required ground radar at major commercial airports and standardized visual holding indicators on runways. Most crucially, the disaster birthed modern crew resource management. This was a complete overhaul of cockpit hierarchy, establishing a culture where a junior officer's warning can never be dismissed by a captain. Again today, the rigid safety protocols that protect thousands of flights every hour are built directly on the tragic lessons learned.